Good evening and welcome to Interface. I'm your host, Rosalia Whitehead, standing in for Tembisa Mahele. It's just hours before the 2016 local government elections and campaigning for votes has come to an end. One more person has lost their lives amidst the electoral violence. This brings to more than 12 the number of people who've died so far. The Independent Electoral Commission, or the IEC, has received complaints regarding political parties violating the Code of Conduct, and there have also been complaints against the IEC itself. The question we're asking tonight is the current climate conducive to a free and fair municipal election? To discuss this further, I'm joined by the IEC chairperson, Glenn Mashinini, and political analyst, Aubrey Mashikli. You may join this discussion on Facebook, Interface on SABC, and Twitter at Interface on SABC. Good evening and welcome. Have you seen anything like this before?
Other than in 1994, no, this is a new development that we've seen in the country. And as the IEC, we would like to convey our condolences to the families of those ones that have actually lost their lives during this campaign. However, we've also condemned the violence and any breaches of the Code of Conduct. As such, mechanisms have been put in place that have actually been aimed at ensuring that it contains or eradicates any forms of violation. And as we are speaking now, the number of incidences and matters that were brought to our attention, and the Electoral Commission internally has created a directorate of Code of Conduct breaches and offences, which processes those matters so that we are in a position to consider them as the Commission if those matters should then proceed to the next stage where there is they're taken to the courts for the courts to then make a determination on those matters, because our powers are only as far as making those determinations. However, I would like also to point out that there are a number of incidences where we're using panels in provinces that are actually dealing with the diffusion of these issues through mediation and dispute resolutions.
Okay. Mr. Mashikli, your response?
Well, we have seen worse because, as Mr. Mashinini says, the period leading up to the 1994 elections was quite violent. You will remember that in the years leading up to that election, thousands of people died, particularly in Kwa-Zulu Natal. Therefore, what we have had since 1994 has been a relatively peaceful period around elections. In this election, my expectation is that largely this election will be free and fair. But what we must do, though, is to distinguish between an election and the election. Now, if we look at the elections as a process, we should be concerned that depending on which report you are looking at, this year alone, about 80 people have died in political violence. In fact, the violence we're talking about today started before this year. In parts of Kwa-Zulu Natal, there are signs that killings at an intra-party or inter-party level, but particularly at an intra-party level, have been happening since 2015. The question we must ask ourselves is, why is this happening? At the broadest level, it is about a change in the relationship between political parties, particularly the ruling party, and state power. And therefore, access to political power through the dominant party is no longer an end in itself, but has become the means towards the achievement of other ends, particularly narrow ends such as economic ends. So that's the first thing. The first thing, some of the violence is about the state of the economy. If you look at the number of vacancies available in the local state in this election, and the number of candidates, the number of candidates is much, much higher than the number of vacancies, suggesting that unemployment is one of the driving forces behind some of the violence. But of course, another dynamic are internal dynamics within some of the political parties, particularly the ruling party, but also have seen some inter-party violence. What I'm also worried about is the image of the IEC. I think we must impress on political parties not to make statements that unnecessarily impugn the credibility and integrity of the IEC. Because if that happens, in other words, if political parties make unfortunate statements about the credibility and integrity of the IEC and the electoral process, you create a climate in which, first of all, you undermine the integrity of the IEC and therefore the integrity of the elections, and therefore you may even create a climate for even more violence after the result is announced.
Okay. Mr. Mashinini, to what extent has the political assassinations overshadowed the elections, if any?
Well, look, I mean, loss of life is a concern in any situation. I think a loss of one life is one too many for the elections. However, I think we've seen that we've had a relatively good and robust political campaigning going on in the country, save for some of the incidences and the areas that Aubrey has just also indicated. And it is true and correct. In fact, there are almost 9,000 positions of councillors that are available, but we're talking that we have over 61,000 candidates that are contesting these elections. And some of these activities, at this stage, we are awaiting the investigations that are underway. We are pleased to note that the Minister of Police, as part of the security clusters and our partners, have now already made breakthroughs that shows that there is a robust engagement in terms of investigation as well of these matters. Because if people are not arrested and there's nothing being done, then we will be creating an environment that's not conducive to free and fair elections. But so far, what one has observed is that most of the activities have gone, save for some few incidences, by and large, have gone accordingly as far as the electoral environment that is conducive to free and fair elections. But we await the finality of the reports that are still coming through, and we are receiving various complaints, and our Directorate of Electoral Offences is actually compiling and evaluating them, and those will then be given to the Commission for consideration as to what action according to the Electoral Act should be undertaken.
Okay. Remember, you can join this discussion on Facebook, Interface on SABC. Let's take a short break. Welcome back. We're discussing the IEC's readiness for the upcoming local government elections. My guests are IEC Chairperson Glenn Mashinini and political analyst Aubrey Mashiki. You may join this discussion on Facebook, Interface on SABC, and Twitter at Interface on SABC. Mr. Mashinini, I read somewhere that South Africa is becoming a society that is patiently teaching itself to accept violence and death as a small price to pay for living in a democratic South Africa. What do political assassinations say about what citizens tolerate, and what can they do?
I think it's important that we remain focused in what our Constitution provides, that our country is a country that has as its values a multi-party political system. And that is a requirement of our Constitution, but also that we have the rule of law. So in terms of the developments that relate to any violations of the Code of Conduct and some incidences leading to loss of lives, we have actually mobilized the political parties as stakeholders, members of the community and leaders in the community, eminent South Africans that should actually come out and reiterate our commitment as a country to our constitution. And now operationally, we as the Electoral Commission, in partnership with the state agencies responsible for defending the constitution, are seized as we speak with investigations of all matters that are coming to our attention and looking at the areas that have what we call a potential of being trouble spots and monitoring them closely and ensuring that the citizens of this country are defended and are protected. On the other side, the Electoral Commission also says that disputes may be diffused even before they lead into the violence because of the contestation that is there and the scramble for the positions, whether they are intra-party or inter-political party. So those mechanisms and measures are what we see as a major mechanisms that the Electoral Commission has put in place. But elections are a people's elections. Now, we as South Africans, we know that what violence could mean, and we need to make sure that come election day, we go and cast our vote and we celebrate our constitution. More than that, it should be a mourning loss of lives.
Okay, Mr. Mashitri?
Well, I don't buy the notion that South Africans have accepted violence as a small price to pay for democracy. I think it's a mischaracterization of our society. I think most South Africans are actually unhappy even about these current levels of violence, which, as I said, if you put matters into perspective, the incidence of violence is much lower now than it was prior to the 1994 elections. But as Mr. Mashinini says, one death is one death too many. What can citizens do? I think before we come to that, we who are commentators and others who should know better should distinguish between different kinds of violence because political violence is a very broad term. I want to zero in on the assassinations. I think assassinations are usually a product of a conspiracy. When citizens do become aware of a conspiracy to murder a candidate, it is their responsibility to report that conspiracy to the security establishment. Even after the fact of an assassination, if they have knowledge about the people behind the assassination, it is the responsibility of citizens to report that. And by doing so, they'll be defending our democracy. But the greatest responsibility we have as citizens is to engage with the democratic process in such a way that the climate militates against the kind of violence we have seen over the past few months.
Okay. Let's look at the latest court ruling that Lucas Ngobeni, a councillor in Soshanguve's name, appear on the ballot paper. Will it be on the ballot paper? Because as the IEC has indicated, the ballots have been printed.
We only found out last night the determination of the courts, and I had to be here this morning. So that matter is being looked at by the administration, and later on we'll be able to make the announcement.
Okay, and similarly, the NFP is expected to go to court tomorrow.
Yes.
Should the court rule in favor of the NFP, what will happen next?
The Commission will have to look at the situation and the implications of that particular decision. At this stage, I think it would be sub judice to discuss the matter, save for that the Commission has actually expressed its sympathy with the NFP when the incident occurred, but we have to abide by the Electoral Act, and the Electoral Act has specifications which unfortunately and admitted by the then leadership of the NFP were not actually met, which was the deadlines by almost 20 days between the time of submission of candidates and deposits and when we noted that the reconciliation of political parties, candidates, and the deposits, then we noted that the NFP had not made its payment. And it was an unfortunate situation, and we had no choice. And there's precedent to this situation. It had occurred in Kwa-Zulu Natal in the South Coast against the IFP, but also it had occurred before against the African National Congress in the Western Cape. Therefore, there's the precedents in terms of the laws that indicated that we do not have any room to move. However, we will await the outcomes of the Concord decision.
Okay, thank you. We'll be back after this short break. Welcome back. We're discussing the IEC's readiness for the upcoming local government elections. My guests are IEC Chairperson Glenn Mashinini and political analyst Aubrey Mashiki. Mr. Mashiki, are the courts a pragmatic way of resolving election disputes, especially if an election could go ahead before a judgment is made?
Well, in certain circumstances, going to court as a product of internal party battles or other types of battles is unavoidable. What my concern is that what we see with regard to these election battles ending up in court is a microcosm of a broader problem in South African politics. The extent to which we fail to resolve political disputes, and on too many occasions, those political disputes are taken to our courts. So there's an extent to which we politicize our courts. We make them part of the political processes because of our failure to democratically resolve political disputes amongst ourselves in political parties and in society in general.
Okay, Mr. Mashinini, in a situation such as Vuwani, where the demarcation dispute has not been resolved before the election, where would residents there vote come the 3rd of August?
The plans are as have been determined before in terms of our planning. So in the various areas we've put in mechanisms of that we should be in a position to provide temporary voting stations, facilities, and the security necessary in the area.
Is there any likelihood of...
But we hope that the people of Vuwani will also understand that the municipality will still go ahead in those areas and services would still be provided. It would be unfortunate that they are not represented. And it is not the end of the day that they could then revert back to the matter and seek other mechanisms, even administratively now, to find the solutions.
Is there any likelihood of an election being held on the 4th?
The plan is that the IEC must meet the constitutional imperative. We are compelled by the Constitution that we must conduct elections 90 days after the end of the 5-year term of municipalities. So we can't breach the constitutional requirements that we are supposed to adhere to. However, we are appealing to the traditional leaders, the community, and the leaders in that area that they should actually engage the administration, the administration, the political parties that are involved in the area, even after the election process has taken place.
Okay.
We have seen before situations that municipalities have been actually reviewed, or some of their concerns could then be met. But time has run out that in this round we can't. The 90 days ends on the 16th of August, and we should have announced the results by then. Okay. Therefore, we have to hold the elections in the area. We hope people will respect the rule of law, will respect the constitution, and will celebrate our democracy. However, they should right their grievances until they are addressed.
Mr. Mashikli, the issue of the DA using the President Nelson Mandela's name on posters and the ANC asking veterans to campaign for it, are there signs of political parties running out of ideas to woo voters?
Well, I don't think so. There are signs of desperation, though. On the part of the ANC, I think there are concerns within the party about the possibility of serious erosions in electoral support, especially in Gauteng, because Gauteng is a key site of battle in this election for the ANC. It's therefore not surprising that the ANC has decided to call upon former President Thabo Mbeki, stalwarts such as Ahmed Kathrada and others to support them in this electoral effort. That's not surprising. The ANC is panicking about Gauteng. When you look at the DA and their decision to invoke Nelson Mandela, it is consistent with what happened in 2011. In 2011, effectively, the former leader of the DA, Helen Zille, turned the DA into a quasi-liberation movement. The DA now, toys, it sings struggle songs, it claims some of the struggle heroes as its own heroes. And therefore, it's not surprising that today they're invoking Nelson Mandela, because they are hoping that by invoking Nelson Mandela, voters will look at Nelson Mandela in contradistinction to what is happening in the ANC, particularly at leadership level, and will come to the conclusion that the ANC is deviating from the values of Nelson Mandela. But where they may be mistaken is that as a result, those voters will vote a DA.
Okay. Mr. Mashinini, let's look at voting itself on the day. How is counting conducted?
That's a very important question, that the integrity of the outcomes and the results is based on that we have in the voting presiding officer, deputy, and the electoral staff. But in there also, each political party is allowed to provide 2 party agents who play a role of being watchdogs to the system. Further to that, we also have trained domestic and international observers who are also independent, that are there from the time when the voting station is opened and the boxes are sealed to the end of the day. And the other mechanism is that then you vote where you are registered, so you can't vote more than once. Secondly, the counting takes place immediately after the voting has closed, and the results are then counted with the political. And the presiding officer is required then to sign a results slip together with the political party agents. And the political party agents are then allowed to take a snapshot of that result slip, which then they can send to their political party. And from there, this goes to the municipal office, where there is an independent audit firm from one of our big 4 audit firms who reconcile the ballots, the number of people who have voted, and the results that have come from that particular area.
Thank you so much for coming through. And that's how we end our program this week. From the team, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.